Hey everyone, welcome to the session and thanks so much for attending GM, which is basically good morning in Web3, and basically signifies, I guess, like that Web3 is like a global community and we're always working at different hours of the day, and so GM is kind of a nice way to unify or like let everyone know that you're online and you're working. And so often you'll see this a lot in like Discords, Slacks, Telegram communities around Web3 projects. Just to give you a little bit of context to kick off. So yeah, it's one way that you know that someone else is in Web3 as well by saying GM. So hey, I'm Nivaaz. I do a lot of growth, design, engineering, and now also Web3. So to tell you a little bit about like my kind of history, I've worked across like a bunch of different startups, scale-ups, and industries as well, including like crypto, education, I guess like SaaS trading, pretty much you name it, I've done it. So I'll just walk you through kind of some of my experience and like what led me to where I am today. So I actually started off doing electrical engineering as my degree at university. And then from there, became like a tutor at Art of Smart, where I actually started like deep diving into kind of web, tech, all that kind of stuff. And did a little bit of like designing an ATAR calculator when I was there as well. From there, I moved to work at a crypto startup for a little while. I had no idea what they were doing back then. This was in like 2017. Even if you like Googled crypto at the time, it was like, nothing would really come up. Or you just have like a bunch of news articles about like Bitcoin and, it potentially going to be the future and that kind of stuff. They didn't survive for very long. They went under about 3 months in, but I was just doing traditional like web development with them at the time. From there, I went to become an FPGA engineer, which is like a hardware engineer at a trading firm, which was really fun. But I learned a lot about like trading tokens. They also had their own crypto teams. It was interesting, like chatting to them about like how all of that stuff worked. Did consulting for a bit, didn't love it, definitely not for me. And then moved on to become a front-end intern at Canva, which I absolutely loved. I love the text-based VC building stuff. And that's when I came out and like trying to build my own startup, or startup number 2. I'll come back to that in a second. Basically, after I finished up at Canva, 2020 happened. I decided to drop out of university and decided to do the Antler program because I really wanted to build my own startup. Didn't work out for me, but I ended up freelancing for a bunch of the startups that came out of the Antler program. Pretty much as a product designer, did a little bit of front-end engineering and then some like social media management and that kind of stuff as well. From there, I went to become a growth engineer at Eucalyptus. I was there for about like 18, 19 months. That was super interesting, looking at like the health tech space and then working on growth initiatives from like acquiring customers to educating them and then also retaining them in the long term. And then I've now gone full-time Web3, and I'm working on my own project, which is called Insider XYZ, which is bringing like enhancing customer and like retail brand connection, or like transforming that relationship by engaging them with like loyalty and rewards, which is all powered by the blockchain. And I'm also currently working at Immutable as a growth engineer as well. And I've done, tried to launch 2 startups in the past. One was to, I guess, like automate my role that I did in consulting. And then the second was around kind of rewards and discovery and around like the creator economy as well. And if you have questions about that, I can definitely talk more about that down the line. Do you have any questions at this point? Feel free to drop them in the chat. If you do, I cannot open the chat. Give me 1 second.
Can you see the chat?
Nothing yet. I can see it now, yes. All right, I'll keep going. And if you've got any questions, you can let me know as we go through. I'd love to know about you before we get started so that I can kind of tailor the content that we're going through today around you. So I'd love to know, to begin with, if you could choose between dogs or coffee, or like cats and tea, which one would you choose? I love dogs and coffee. So it's definitely a really tricky one. I'd probably go with dogs. My dogs in particular are very soft and cuddly. Come on, guys, we need some action in the chat. Awesome. Dogs scare you. That's wonderful to know. Cats are scary. Awesome. I'm going to assume that's a coffee. Cat. Very nice. Cool. Cool. So I want this to be like a super interactive session so that we can all, you know, be having a discussion. And I know you can't talk to me necessarily, but please use the chat. And yeah, ask any questions that you have. No questions, silly questions. I don't know how familiar you are with Web3 or not familiar you are with Web3, but we're all learning, including me. So there's a good chance that someone in the audience knows more than me about Web3 stuff. So feel free to correct me if there's, or like add some extra insight if there is any that you want to share. And yeah, definitely use the chat and I'll be checking throughout and I'll make sure that I'm asking questions back to you throughout as well so that we can yeah, make sure this is an engaging session and you can get what out of it, like whatever you want to essentially. Cool. So what we'll cover today is first, like what is Web3? So I'll take you through like Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, and you know, how did Web3 come about and that kind of thing. The second is what does like building in Web3 look like, in particular, like thinking about my experience at Immutable, what I've seen with other like startups in the space, and then also building my own startup in the space. And then the last two bits I'll chat to you about is like the challenges of building in Web3 and then the really awesome parts about building in Web3. Cool. So before we get into it, I'd love to know how much do you know about Web3? And you can drop the emoji or the text of the word in the chat. I know that doing an emoji is sometimes a little bit weird on a keyboard. So do you know lots? Drop a heart. Do you know a little bit? Drop a star. And if you don't know a lot at all, or if you're a complete newbie, you can drop a coin. And I'll have a look. I don't know what I know. Yeah, I feel the same way. Awesome. So we've got lots of stars and coins. So that, yeah, that's awesome to know. I would definitely sit between these two as well. And like part of that is because like, I think a lot of the knowledge on Web3 is like quite scattered across the internet. And that's just a part of decentralization, which I'll chat a little bit more about in a bit. And also the space is moving so fast and innovating so fast. It's like almost impossible to keep up with like everything that's going on. So let's talk about what is Web3. So if there's a Web3, that probably means there's a Web 1 and a Web 2, right? So in this section, I will chat to you about like what the three things are and then like the different parts of Web3 as well. So Web 1 in particular was kind of the start of the internet, if you'd like to think about it. So like pre-2000s internet almost. So this is basically where you would just like read content. So if you think about the entire web internet just being like blog pages, essentially, that's basically what Web 1 was. So you could like consume content, maybe post some content, but that was about it. So then came along Web 2. So this came along with the creation of like Google, Facebook, and a lot of like social media platforms that we know now, like Instagram, Patreon, all that kind of stuff. So with Web 2, what we were allowed to do now is like through a centralized organization like Facebook or YouTube, we were able to like create content and then publish it as well. So reading and writing on the internet. But the issue with this is that like any monetization or like distribution of content was all up to like that centralized entity. So even like Instagram. And if any of you are like kind of connected to that content creator world, you would have seen like people are always talking about the algorithm, like posts not showing up, or like you're only seeing videos or not seeing videos. That's all because of that centralized organization. So you don't really own the way that your stuff is shown in the world, and like people are kind of, depending on the engagement that you get on your content, that's how they decide how much money you're going to make. So centralized content creation and distribution. Cool. And then Web3 basically is taking that and thinking about like read, write, and own. So all of a sudden, you no longer need to go through some kind of centralized entity like Facebook or YouTube to make your money on. And I might talk about the example of music, for example. So rather than publishing your song onto Spotify and then waiting for Spotify to pay you out per stream, you can actually sell parts of your song or the entire song to someone else, and you will get 100% of those like rewards back to you, or like royalties back to you. So you actually get to like, own and decide how you're going to sell a particular item, how much you're going to sell it for. And like a really good example of this is also like if you were to sell like your physical mobile phone to a friend, like you get to determine the price, you get to determine like when you sell it, how you sell it, all that kind of stuff as well. And that's kind of what Web3 enables. Cool. So if you find me saying like Web2 throughout this presentation, it just means like the internet and the world as we know it now, so including like social media and all that kind of stuff. If there's any other words that I say throughout the presentation that I haven't defined or I haven't told you what they mean and you're not sure, just pop it in a comment, and Alaha can stop me and I'll tell you what it is, or I'll try and make sure that I define it the next time I have questions. Cool. So what is like some of the issues with Web 2, and then what does Web 3 enable? So with Web 2, again, you have to sell your items like using third-party tools. So you think about like Facebook Marketplace or something like that. It's like this entity that like blocks and regulates everything that you want to do. And a centralized authority controls how you can make and engage with your content, and then how you're monetized for it. And at the end of the day, you don't really own your data. Like when you post a photo, it's now in that Instagram server, and they're in control of it. And if they lose that photo, like there's a potential that you never get it back. And so in terms of like what Web3 enables then is that you can sell those items directly from one person to another, and you can clearly see who owns that item as well. The second bit is that you can control exactly how much you make from that piece of content, and then you actually own that data as well. And that ownership piece comes from the blockchain, which is basically a list of transactions that like will clearly say that, hey, Nivaaz owns like X iPhone. Cool. So in terms of like Web3 and the applications that we have for Web3 right now, there's maybe like 6 different sections, but 2 of them I've kind of left off because they get a little bit technical and probably not the expert in them as well. So I'll talk about these 4. So the first is like NFTs, which are non-fungible tokens. So these are unique digital identifiers, which you'd find on the blockchain. And that would be that little bit of code or that little bit of text that says, hey, Nivaaz owns like the green iPhone number 27. The second bit is decentralized autonomous organizations. So if you think about like our current government, it's like almost one person or one collection of people that decides how the entire country runs. With a decentralized autonomous organization, it's all based on like everyone voting on like little changes that you want to make to like how the company runs, how it like pays the employees, all that kind of stuff. And so it's like, taking away the power from like one person or one entity and like distributing that among everyone who wants to vote or like be a part of curating how the DAO works. The third bit is decentralized finance. So if you think about like the banking system, and I think like a really good example and like interesting one is actually the like Russia and Ukraine war. So while like banks have decided to stop taking funds from Russia or coming from Russia, like crypto actually means that you don't have to go through some centralized organization to accept or transfer funds. And so like in Ukraine and in Russia, like that has become a lot stronger. Like you're seeing a lot more transactions happen because it no longer has to go through a centralized body. And then the last one is the metaverse. So while the metaverse itself is not necessarily like Web3, but the concept of like creating your own world with your own rules and like decentralizing that from like what we are in everyday life, like that bit of the metaverse is like Web3. And I've linked a little document down at the bottom from A16Z who goes through like a deep dive on like these 4 sections plus the other 2 that I kind of alluded to. And I'll share this deck out afterwards and you can like do a deep dive on that. Cool. And then, so yeah, decentralization is like a really big part of Web3. And so while it enables a lot of great things, like transparency and ownership and things like that, it doesn't mean that it's like the end game. I think like centralization is always going to have a place, at least for the near future. Often you can't like run a company without having like one person, you know, calling some of the shots or like organizing some of the stuff. And it's been really interesting to see the evolution of DAOs, like even over the last couple of years, and how they've started off really decentralized and then also almost like centralizing again. And then it's going to be like a lot of back and forth, I think, until we work out exactly what that harmony is between decentralization and centralization across like different industries and applications as well. Cool. So yeah, we just covered Web 1, which was reading only, Web 2, which is like reading, writing, monetization through like some kind of centralized entity, and then Web 3, which was like taking ownership of your content and then being able to like dictate exactly how much it sells for. So decentralizing that. And then yeah, we just talked a little bit about decentralization, which is taking it away from like some kind of authority which dictates like how, when, what, where, why you're doing whatever. Do you have any questions at this point? I know that was a lot of technical content.
We have some questions on Slido that's coming up, but nothing in the chat at the moment. No.
Okay, cool. Should we use the Slido questions?
Sure. So one of the questions is, what are some of key limitation or downsides of Web3?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's definitely a lot of them, and they're all very different. I guess like some of them in particular I touched on with the DAOs. So when you're so completely decentralized, it's like hard to discover content. It's hard to also, like if I was to say like, hey, we should paint every building purple, like it's hard for me to get buy-in with every single person without having some kind of centralized authority, whether it be Twitter or social media, and like putting it out there. And so if everything was decentralized, I could only tell my 12 friends that were like directly around me. And so it becomes a lot more difficult in that way. That's like 2 examples, but let me know if you want some more. Hopefully I'll cover a bunch more as we go throughout the presentation. What was the next question?
Yeah, we have so many questions. I think I'm going to ask one more and then we can move on.
Sure.
The question is, you described that information and learning Web3 is kind of scattered all over the internet. Could you highlight the key places as to how to learn effectively?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say like there's a lot of power in community, and it also depends like what you want to learn, but Twitter is an awesome place to start, I think. But also like being able to sift through like the good content and the bad content is also like a skill that you need to learn before you start like doing transactions, especially if you're new to it. I also love going to, like, if you're a builder, like going to somewhere like Ethereum's website and then like reading through how Ethereum works. And then they've got some awesome tutorials on like how to build in Solidity and stuff like that, which is the language that you can use to build smart contracts. I think like those websites are probably the most trustworthy, like going to the actual blockchain website and then learning from there. I'm going to say like Binance and Coinbase are also awesome resources for this kind of stuff, but be able to discern between like what's content that Coinbase has put out or like Binance has put out versus like what is something that they're just serving you based off of like what a project is creating, because that's when that like you have to do your own research before you can like go down that rabbit hole. Cool. We'll keep going just in the interest of time. How did you first discover Web3? If you didn't discover it today, do you want to let me know in the chat? So maybe like, was it a friend that told you? Did you find it on Twitter? Did you come across a TikTok? Awesome. So we've got like NFTs. I think like that's probably a really common one. Oh, this event, love it. Friends talking about it. Awesome. And someone actually started a DAO, which is awesome. Or your friend started a DAO. So I actually came into like learning about Web3, I think like quite young. I'd always been really fascinated with like new technologies and things like Bitcoin and stuff like that. Working at that crypto startup, I think like made it better. And then as the internet and like I think the community around Web3 kind of grew, that's when I started like getting more heavily into it, like being able to invest. And then started looking into like different projects and different coins, and then got into like gaming, so play and earn, which then led me into NFTs, so you can like NFTs for your avatars or your game pieces, and then from there getting into like DAOs and that kind of stuff. And like the evolution of TikTok, I think over 2020 played a really big part in this. Like a lot of my feed was just like crypto news and that kind of stuff because we're in the bull market. Cool. I'll keep going maybe. Is there anything that you're building right now that, what did I write here? Okay, cool. Have you built something before? So whether it's a project or a solution or a startup, or are you building something right now is the question. Do you want to let me know in the chat? Awesome. Cool. We've had some people that have tried to play with different platforms. Thought about building right now. Keen to try building. Awesome. So we've got like a real mix, which is awesome. So now I'll talk to you about like, I guess, like how to start building into Web3. So I think it's very similar to Web2 in that like you kind of define a problem, validate the problem, and then start building it. So finding out a problem from a customer or in an industry. The second bit is validating. So often you're Googling, talking to your friends about it. And then part 3 is like building some kind of website or support or prototype to like build out your idea. So what that translates to in kind of Web3 is thinking about these 3 questions. So looking at like what's hot in Web3 or what's trending right now. The second part is looking at what are you passionate about and like what's something that connects with you, which I think is still a Web2 thing. And then the third bit is like what is a problem that actually resonates with the people that you're building for, because not every single person is going to be, I guess, your target customer at the end of the day, and they're not going to be a Web3 native as well. So we'll talk through trends, finding the right problem, and then connecting to the real world. So as for trends in Web3, there's definitely a lot of different things. And I think this is a factor of like decentralization again. But something that's I'm seeing a lot of right now is like NFTs / blockchain and like the metaverse coming into the Web2 world. So like we're seeing big brands like Starbucks, for example, like experimenting with NFTs. The AFL just released their NFTs as well. Actually spoke to the tech founder who like is helping them build that, and like their solution sounds really, really interesting. And there's a lot of like real life utility that will be integrated with that. MotorDAO is doing like the decentralized music, so giving power back to the creators on like how they can monetize published music, all that kind of stuff. And then we're seeing like Unity, which is a technology used to build games. Like they're looking at different blockchain integrations as well. And then there's like this one is like 3D fashion basically, and like AR and stuff like that you can buy as like NFTs. And then this one at the bottom is also Nike. They actually acquired a NFT building agency, which is pretty interesting. And then Hugo Boss actually did a collaboration with an NFT collection as well. Cool. So in terms of finding the right problem, you need to think about kind of 3 things. So number 1 is like, how does the Web3 work in your area of expertise? And so for me, it was like thinking about, okay, how do we bring Web3 into growth, and like what does that look like? Or, you know, customer centric, or building something customer centric. The second bit is like, does decentralization, blockchain, or Web3 actually solve a problem? Sometimes it's really easy to say, oh, you know, we'll chuck this solution on the blockchain, but it doesn't really add any value or any additional like functionality. And like the Web2 solution did just as well. So I think like thinking about like, does it even make sense to put it on the chain? Like, does it have like a 10-fold increase in value? That's really important to consider. And is what you're doing just trendy right now, or does it actually stand the test of time? And different people and different founders will think about this in different ways. So sometimes it'll be, I think, you want to do something that's like hype driven. So maybe it's like an NFT collection and you want to make quick money, like then maybe that's what you want to build. But ultimately, I think like investors or, you know, even consumers are thinking about this in a different way. They're like, okay, if I'm going to put my money into this NFT or this collection, like what's going to make it profitable 10 years down the line, or 5 years down the line, or a couple months down the line at least. You've obviously got the other hand of people who are trying to trade like quickly for money. And so it's a balance of like, who do you want to attract in the long term? Do you want people who are going to like give you the money and then sell straight away? Or do you want people that are here to buy and like build that community over time so that you can like, you know, transform that part of the world that you're trying to transform? And so for us, basically what this translated to was like my co-founder and I had a lot of experience working with consumer brands in like the retail space and like looking at growth and that kind of stuff. And we also had domain experience. So my co-founder had experience like working with enterprises on like metaverse strategy and like Web3. And then I had experience working with customers directly on how to improve that user experience, like build deep brand connections. And then we're both like crypto natives. So we've been working in Web3, exploring Web3, all that kind of stuff. And so putting those three components together, it made a lot of sense for us to build like a growth loyalty solution for like retail consumers, like who want to get into the Web3 space, because we have the experience to back up the claims, but also understand the Web3 perspective and how much value that adds. Cool. And then, yeah, again, making sure that whatever your solution is actually connects to the real world. So thinking about how does this enhance like an online and an offline experience? So is it like a retail experience in store? Is it like an AR filter? Yeah, how does that bring something cool into the real world? And a lot of NFT collections did like merch or, you know, free items or art or something like that that would be shipped out to you. Like that's one way to do it. Obviously, there's much more elaborate and more meaningful ways to like bring that utility into real life, but that's one example. And then showing a really clear return on investment. So if I buy this NFT, like what is the return on investment I'm getting right now? And a great project that's done something really well with this is Surge Women NFT. So basically by buying their pass, you would get access to a bunch of like boot camps, resources on like building in Web3 and then like webinars and like all that kind of stuff. And so for me, it was like a no-brainer. I'm like, okay, I'm going to spend $50 and then the entire lifetime of this NFT, I get access to like these bazillion resources that they're adding more to. Like, why wouldn't I purchase it? And then, yeah, make sure that you're solving a real problem in the Web2 space with Web3. I think like that makes a lot of sense. And obviously you can solve a Web3 problem using Web3 as well. It's just a more niche thing. And it's probably something that I can't speak to, as well as like solving something in Web2 with Web3. Things like that tends to be like the hottest solution right now. Cool. So we went through, yeah, what's hot in Web3, what's something that you're passionate about and how can you connect with it? And then how do you bring like Web3 into that and make sure that people resonate what you're building for? Do you have any questions?
Yes.
Awesome.
So there are a couple of questions that asks about how do you discover trends in Web3?
That is a great question. It's a very good question. I probably like Twitter is a good one. Again, like with the decentralization, it just depends like what part of Web3 you're in. Like those trends are going to be different. I think I follow a lot of like Web3 people on LinkedIn. And so often they'll be posting, or like content creators even, like they'll be posting about like the new things that are coming up in Web3. And that's like a really good indicator. And then if people are doing things around like NFTs, like OpenSea or like these big like marketplaces for NFTs is like a great way to have a look at that. And Decentraland is a really popular blockchain built metaverse. That's really easy. Like if you're subscribed to their newsletter, you can see like exactly what all these brands are doing, like online music festivals, online like shopping events. There's even like we have like Vogue fashion nights and things like that, or like Milan Fashion Week. Like there's Decentraland Fashion Week. There's all this kind of stuff. So I think like subscribing and like being around all that kind of content is like one of the best indicators to work out the trends.
Nice. The other question is, why is it common for people in Web3 to build passion projects over startups?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think like sometimes they are the same. I think like when Web3 first started, it was often like, how can I be the first mover in this space and like make a quick buck? And so I think like over time, because the customer sentiment has changed, like they're trying to think, like builders trying to think longer term now as well. It's not so much about like making a quick dollar. And I think with the change of the market as well, it changed, like the sentiment of like builders and consumers changes as well. So if you're going to release something in a bear market, which is what we're in right now, you want to make sure that it's like really trustworthy, that people are really looking at the team and like what you're actually creating and does it create long-term value. Whereas during a bull market, it's quite hype driven. And so often I think that dilutes maybe the passion and like the meaningfulness behind what you're building. But I'm just like hypothesizing at this point. So I don't know if that's exactly the solution, but that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, nice. The other question is, where is a good place to meet other Web3 founders?
Good question again. I guess if you're in like the Asia Pacific region, like DAO Under is an awesome Discord that I can recommend. Actually, I think early work probably you could find a lot of them. But I think like your traditional like VC groups and like communities and stuff like that, there's definitely like Web3 people in there. I don't think it's like so decentralized that they don't go to normal VC stuff. And the other place would be, I guess, like Discords or communities around like Web3 builders, which you can probably find on Twitter, I would say is the best example, or even Discord.
Sweet. That's all the question for now. We have 3 more, but I could leave it till the end.
Okay, cool. Cool. So now that we like can establish a problem space, what else do we need to think about when we're building in Web3? So a couple of things to think about when you're actually starting to build is like team, tech, customer, and then how do you ultimately distribute your product in a decentralized world? So yeah, we'll look at like tech, timing, and then kind of distribution. So in terms of tech, I've got a lot of content here, so I might summarize it as I go because I know I'm going a little bit over. So with tech, like there is a lot of different technologies out there. Like there's Ethereum, there's like Bitcoin, and then there's like a billion different smaller solutions like Solana, Tezos, all that kind of stuff. And each one comes with its own unique community, and every single one will be a different size. Every single one will have different experience, like different builders behind that team. And they'll be like catered towards different products as well. So for example, Immutable is like really catered towards games right now. And yeah, I think that's probably the best example I can give, whereas Ethereum probably is like a little bit more like, hey, use this for anything. And so if you pick a more niche product or like technology, so for example, Flow, like while it might give you better like tech features, like it might be faster, more secure, all that kind of stuff. If you're building in that space and no one else believes in it and there's no community around it that's already using that technology, like that ultimately can be a strategy for you to fail. And so there's a big piece around like education, understanding the community sentiment, like what is the user experience like as well, when you're thinking about like what technology to pick at the end of the day. And so sometimes it means that you have to pick a bigger, more popular chain, especially if you're going to build a consumer product. Whereas if you're building maybe something more niche where the blockchain is completely abstracted away and no one really needs to know what you're using, then it might make more sense for you to go and pick like a more niche technology. I will leave it to you to ask me more questions on that and I'll go to the next slide. In terms of like what's the best time to build, so this is a question someone asked me in Slack. So I wanted to make sure that I addressed it. I actually think now is the best time to build, like during the bear market. During the build market, I think I touched on this before, sometimes you get people in it for kind of the wrong reasons. They just want to make like, you know, a quick profit. Whereas during the bear market, you have people and the time to like think about like, what is my solution going to be? How it's going to evolve in the long term? And you can like strategically almost plan to launch it during a bull market, or you can like basically like build up momentum up until the bull market to make sure that your product does the best that it possibly can. And then you can like supercharge it almost with the hype that's already in the space. And I think other things that you need to consider is like, what does success look like for you? Like, do you want to make a quick profit? Do you want like lots of people in your community, all that kind of stuff? Then you might want to leverage a bull market where there's like a lot of hype and that kind of stuff. Think about how long your product's going to take to build, and then add a little bit more time to it, and try and like backtrack, I guess, from there. Obviously, it's really hard to predict a bull market, but taking that into consideration and like putting marketing next to it can like help you find out like what is the best time for you to start building and then also release. Cool. And so distribution and marketing is a little bit different in Web3. So because it's quite decentralized, it means that you have to really leverage the community that sits around the technology, the idea, or the problem space that you're innovating in. And that can often be correlated with like, if you're going to sell NFTs or if you're going to have your own digital currency, like what are the people that are sitting around that and how do you get people to buy into that as well? But like if you're going to market an NFT versus your own token, like digital currency, like those two marketing strategies are going to be different because they're almost two different niches of NFTs. Or if you think about two different problem spaces that attract like different customers at the end of the day, like that's how you need to be thinking about it. Twitter is another awesome space for it. And then making sure that you have some kind of way to build trust as well. And like often that's through Twitter. So if you're buying followers, if you're doing a lot of paid marketing, often people are just like, these guys have money, but like, where is the trust? We don't know if they're like genuine people at the end of the day. And so like sometimes that trust comes from like your experience in Web 2. Sometimes it comes from like being really genuine and like educating people and like helping them out and just being like really active in the community to give back. Like that builds trust over time as well. So you have to think about it in a like quite a different way to like Web 2 marketing, because you can't just throw money at the problem to solve it. You often have to actually like go out there, make connections, talk to people, and it's like a long-term play rather than like a quick short-term play where you can throw $1 million at it and it solves your issue of like how to distribute. Cool. So I'll jump into some of the challenges of building in Web3. But I'd love to know, like, if you've built something before, what are some of the challenges that you've actually faced when you were building? Doesn't have to be Web3, can be Web 2. No one's ever built like a tower made of pasta before and like found that challenging. Coming up with the idea or problem, yeah, that's definitely a tricky one. But hopefully you were now educated on that from the last sections that we did. Attracting users, yeah, that's definitely a tricky one. I think like even conveying like whatever your idea or problem is to the users, like that's often like the core part of that makes it really difficult. So there's a lot of challenges unique to Web3, but a lot of them I think again like can be echoed from Web 2. And so they kind of sit around, in my experience, like user experience, how adaptable are you in like how you convey information or just in general with your tech and that kind of stuff, and then how Googleable is your solution, or just like being able to Google in general because stuff is really decentralized in Web3. So in terms of user experience, a lot of people have had like a terrible user experience when they onboard into Web3. And so when we've been talking to customers or stores, like often we'll say, oh, you know, NFTs, and then immediately like the entire tone of the conversation just changes because they're like, oh my God, onboarding into Web3 is horrible. Like it was so hard for me to set up a wallet for the first time and that kind of stuff. And so you have to make sure that you have a really good onboarding experience. And like, even though you might think like, oh, you know, I'm going to use MetaMask's tool, they'll have videos on it. Like, no, you have to help onboard people into Web3 because you're building in Web3. Like that is on you. And that should be a part of your strategy and your marketing and your distribution at the end of the day. Because having, a good onboarding experience means that you have more potential customers as well. And I've said mom test because basically like that is a book that helps you make sure that your like idea or solution is like can be passed by anyone and is understandable by anyone. And it's an awesome book that you can read about. And I think like that's one of the best things to apply to Web3. It's because it's so new and so complex. Like how can you make it so simple, so easy, and so familiar as well to people that are in Web 2, like moving into Web 3, or even people that are already in Web 3. Like they'll appreciate it so much and they will go out and like tweet about your product or your platform because it's so easy to use. So yeah, as I said before, like we've been talking to VCs, like different users and even like different brands, like people often just like immediately think all these different things like bad user experience, high friction, difficult to understand. Or they, think about the headlines that they've read, like monkeys. I don't understand what an NFT is. Like, did you know there's a Web5, like completely unrelated, weird buzz stuff that's like been thrown around the internet? And so I think like having some kind of visual or like just being really, really clear on what you're building, how you're building it, like the problem that it solves is like really, really critical. And this all ties into, again, like that user experience. So the second part of this is being really adaptable because the world's moving so fast and Web3 in particular as well. You need to always be kind of listening and keeping a pulse on like the market, the community, the tech. We've seen like the huge crash and burn that's currently happening in like the Web3 space. And I know that a lot of founders are going to be like, okay, hey, all of this stuff has happened. How do we make sure that we're secure? How do we make sure we message our users to make sure that they feel comfortable and they don't like withdraw all their funds and like all that kind of stuff or churn from Web3? Like you have to be keeping a pulse on like the market, and that's like Twitter, TikTok, Discord, community, like however way you like to like be a part of that, going to conferences even. The second bit is like no two people will have the same depth of knowledge in Web3. And so even though I talk to like 2 experts in Web3 in like the VC space, both of them will ask me different questions and they'll hear different things from like what I'm saying. And so like it's really important to like one, establish like what is their depth of knowledge and understanding of Web3 before you go into the conversation, but also be willing, like really like agile in changing your messaging to cater for like the depth of knowledge that they have. And like, do you need to like abstract away, like saying NFT? Do you say digital token instead? Like things like that. And then the last bit is like, sometimes you need to adapt your tech. Like maybe the blockchain will go under, maybe the tokens won't work anymore, maybe the way that you do marketing is not going to be as effective anymore, or the way that you message or speak to investors. And so it's really important to, I think, like be really reflective and like have that growth loop going like with your team. And I think this is definitely a Web 2 thing as well. And like whether it's in your personal life and that kind of thing, like always be thinking about like, how can I do better? How are people receiving this? And yeah, how can we iterate in the long term? Okay, last bit on this, googlability. Make sure your solution's like dead simple, no jargon. Like you actually don't know what people are going to be like looking for on the internet when they try to look for your solution. So like you really have to think about like, what does distribution look like and that kind of thing. And like just from my experience creating content around like what we're doing at the moment, like different people are going to look for different things when they look for things on Google. So like while someone might look up rarity, someone else is going to look up like, how do you create exclusivity with NFTs, for example. And so it's hard to like cater for those 2 things. So you have to think about like different channels for like distribution and like creating like boosting SEO and like that kind of stuff if you decide to go down that path. And Google's not really made to search in Web3, so it's like it's really hard sometimes to discover new projects, discover competitors. I know like pretty much all of my competitors, like you can't Google and like just find them. Like every competitor we found has been through word of mouth of a friend of a friend of a friend who like knows the founders or something like that. And so you have to get creative in how you problem solve and how you find information about what you're building. Cool. Does anyone have any questions at this point?
Is this the end or
I've got a little bit more.
Okay, you can continue.
Okay, cool.
Spend 2 minutes with one last question.
Cool. Awesome. So I'd love to know like what's something awesome about building something new, or building in general in the space, or in whatever space, sorry, not in Web3 in particular. Learning and experimenting. Yeah, I feel the same way, for sure. The satisfaction of knowing something, you've done something innovative. I love that. And like, I think all these things, again, like they definitely apply to Web3. They definitely apply to Web2, applies to Web1 as well. I think like for me, Web3 is small, but it's global. Like you feel like there's like, you know, a million people in Web3, but when you're in Twitter and like everyone's connected and talking to each other in like the same language, saying like GM and all that kind of stuff, like it's quite a beautiful like network effect and like community. The other thing I think with Web3 is like you're one of the first people in the entire world, like on this curve and on this wave. And I think that that's so cool. Like you're one of the first innovators in this space. For me, that's just like, I'm like, oh my God, this just makes my like soul so content. Like there's incredible people from Web2 who are working in Web3 every day. And like I picture myself like working in Immutable team, and like there's literally people from like Meta, EA Games, like all that kind of stuff, like working with me every single day, like in meetings with me. And I get to learn from them. And the same things with like when you're on Twitter and stuff like that, some people are not like doxed, so their like Web2 identity is like separate to their Web3 identity, and then you get talking to them, you debate with them, you're like, oh, you know, whatever. And then you get on a call with them and they're like, oh, you know, I'm like CEO of blah. And you're like, oh wow, like I had no idea, I was just talking to you, like you're a friend. And so that's like a really nice thing about Web3 is that there's like no kind of barriers, and like everyone is kind of equal in that space, which is really nice. And everyone's like willing to help you learn because they know like Web3 is so decentralized, and like community is such a big part of Web3 and like helping everyone succeed at the end of the day. And like a big part of that is I think the user experience facts as well. And you get to learn and like from so many different industries, because not everyone will be from tech, not everyone will be from retail. Like there's people from like literally every industry of life getting into Web3. And I've got WAG me in the corner, which is like a Web3 saying of like, we're all going to make it. And that's very much the sentiment of Web3. And this is my last slide for questions. And I know we don't have too long, but I'd love to know, yeah, if you have any more questions from here.
Sure. A couple of questions. The first question is, which industries do you think will not be adopting or be impacted by Web3?
That is a really good question. I'm hopeful that like one day every industry will adopt it in some way. You're basically asking like what industry is already perfect, and I don't think that any is, but I'm really curious to know if you think that any industry is perfect. I think the government maybe will take time to do it, just because of like how new the technology is and like that kind of stuff. So I'd say like that's kind of the main thing of like they'll take longer potentially, but I think like there's value for this in like pretty much every industry. I'll have to think on that more.
Nice. The other question is, what's the consequence of not learning about Web3 now?
Ooh, it's a good question. What is the consequence of not learning about Web3 now? I guess like I think it's going to become big down the line, and I think if you're not interested in becoming like a pioneer in the space, or like, you know, learning about something and like letting it kind of simmer in the back of your head for longer, then like so be it. I don't think there's any like pros or cons to it in particular. I think like learning and education is always powerful. So like, yeah, I don't know. Why wouldn't you learn about Web3? I think that's what I want to ask you in return.
Yeah. Ending with a really last good practical question, which is, if someone doesn't have a lot of time available to dedicate to Web3 projects or learning, what would you recommend as something small to keep up with it?
Oh, that's a good question.
Any resources, books, anything that you
yeah
want the audience?
I was actually gonna say like I quite like the way that I got into Web3, which started off with me just like investing like $50 into Ethereum. And then every day I go in and check that and be like, why did it go up? Why did it go down? And you read a news article, you follow someone on Twitter, like all that kind of stuff. I think like that's a good way. And I think the second way is like immersing yourself in the community. So whether that's like following people on TikTok, following Web3 people on LinkedIn. So you can literally just type in like Web3 into LinkedIn and just like follow all the people that come up there. And then on Twitter as well, like following the topics and like that kind of stuff. I think immersing yourself in the community in that way, so that like whenever you are scrolling on social media or like passively looking, you're kind of still learning in that way. I know not everyone enjoys that, but those would probably be my 2 recommendations. Coinbase also has like awesome like mini learning modules, and you get some of the coins back in return for like doing the little quizzes and like learning about the different platforms out there. So I think that's a good one. Yeah, I'm gonna say start with that.
Yeah, it's a really good starting point. Thanks, Nivaaz, for today's masterclass. Really enjoyed it and really excited to jump on Web3 now. That is the end of today's session. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today's evening. Stay in touch with us through our Slack. You can get in touch with Nivaaz, myself on our Slack community that we have, and have a great night. I'll see you at the next one.